The kitchen light in the vacant apartment turned on every night at 11:40 p.m. The apartment on the third floor had been vacant for 11 weeks. Sophie knew this because she had been the last person to wave to the former tenant from the parking lot. She'd watched the moving truck pull away. 2 days later, the management notice appeared on the door. Unit available. Inquired office. Nobody moved in. At 11:40 p.m., every night for 11 weeks, the kitchen light came on. It stayed on for 4 minutes. She timed it in the second week. 242 seconds, then off. She told herself it was an appliance timer. She started keeping a note on her phone. Date, time, duration. 1 line per night. She wasn't sure why she kept it. She kept it anyway. On the 78th night, the light stayed on past midnight. At 12:09 a.m., something moved across the window, unhurried, left to right. The silhouette of a person walking through a kitchen where no person should have been. Drama Vault. Tonight, 5 stories about silence that was held longer than was comfortable, and the one moment when each of these narrators chose to stop holding it. In our first story, a logistics coordinator watches her VP of operations roll out a zero-tolerance time-tracking system with no exceptions, and then watches the system encounter its own creator. In the second, a paralegal documents 11 weeks of impossible activity in a vacant apartment until the night the documentation turns and points at her. In the third, a woman discovers that for 2 years her brother has been managing every conversation between herself and their aging parents and quietly positioning himself for what came next. In the fourth, a man finds, in his mother's attic, a shoebox holding 12 birthday cards his absent father had addressed, stamped, and never sent. 1 for every year until he would have turned 18. And in the fifth, a freelance designer receives a response to a $4,000 invoice she had written off, not from the client, but from the investors funding a pitch deck built entirely from her work. Our first story comes from our /MaliciousCompliance. The narrator, we'll call her Claire, was a logistics coordinator at a regional supply chain firm. She had worked there for 7 years when a new VP of operations arrived. The VP arrived in January with a reorganization framework and a digital time-tracking system she had selected personally. Claire's post never names her. She's referred to throughout only as the new VP. The system was comprehensive. Every employee clocked in and out from assigned workstations. Any entry outside a 3-minute buffer triggered an automatic flag. 5 flags in a calendar month generated a formal performance notation. The VP walked through the escalation path twice at the all-hands meeting and answered 2 questions before announcing the rollout was complete. Exceptions would not be accommodated. Claire registered her badge and read the manual. She had no particular issue with the system. She arrived on time as a matter of habit, but she noticed in the documentation that the audit trail was visible to all registered employees through the company intranet. She filed that information and thought nothing more of it. For 11 weeks, the system ran without incident. Then the VP's assistant, 3 weeks on the job, worked remotely from the VP's workstation on a day the VP was out of town. She used the VP's login to pull a report. The system registered a clock in at 9:04 a.m. For minutes and 12 seconds outside the acceptable window. 1 flag. 2 more followed on subsequent mornings that week, each under the VP's badge number. Each auto-escalated to the performance notation queue. Claire found them Thursday afternoon when she pulled the shared audit trail to check her own entries. She spent 9 minutes reading. She counted carefully. The VP had 3 flags, all registered, all escalated. The system had no override function. The VP had designed it that way, specifically to prevent selective enforcement. Claire did not alert anyone. She went back to work and waited to see what happened when a system built for no exceptions encountered the person who had built it. On Monday, the VP called IT. She wanted the flags removed. IT explained that the system could log entries, but could not delete them without creating an audit record of the deletion, a transparency function the VP had specified as mandatory. She called HR. HR pointed to the documentation the VP had distributed. She sent an email explaining the entries were the result of an authorized assistant accessing the workstation during travel. The documentation contained no provision for authorized assistant access. The VP had removed that clause during revisions, citing potential for abuse. All 3 notations remained. The VP did not reach 5 in a single month. She also did not, in the months that followed, flag any employee's record without first reviewing the shared audit trail. She never acknowledged it out loud. She also never called another all-hands about the system. The tracking system is still in place. I've had 0 flags in 3 years. I don't think anyone else has either since about February. Some records you build to protect yourself. The record in tonight's second story built itself, and Sophie had been keeping it for 11 weeks before she understood what it was actually recording. This story comes from our /nosleep. The narrator gave her name as Sophie. She's a paralegal, worked from home 4 days a week, and has lived in her building for 2 years. She posted at 1:17 a.m. on a Saturday. At the top of her post, she noted she had not slept. The light started in October. Sophie's apartment faces the courtyard. From her living room window, she can see the 3rd floor of the B wing. Unit 3B. She'd known the previous tenant, a graduate student named Vera who had lived on the same schedule for 18 months, walked her bike to the elevator every morning at 7:45, and moved out in August after finishing her degree. Sophie had waved from the parking lot as the moving truck left. For 11 weeks after that, the unit sat dark throughout the day. At 11:40 p.m., the kitchen light came on. For minutes, she timed it in week 2, then off. She assumed an appliance timer. She stopped noticing most nights. She started keeping the phone note in November after she'd mentioned it to a friend and couldn't remember how long it had been happening. Date, time, duration. 1 line per night. In week 8, she raised it at the tenant meeting. Management pulled the unit's power log. The light wasn't drawing current. Nothing in 3B was drawing current. The building manager shrugged. Reflected light. Maybe a passing car, an adjacent unit at an angle. Sophie went home and looked at the window for an hour. The reflected light theory required a light source at a specific angle she couldn't identify. She thought about it until she fell asleep. On the 78th night, the light stayed on past midnight. The LLC had been registered in the state 8 months earlier. The registered agent address matched Sophie's own apartment number. The email on the application was a variation of her professional email with 2 transposed letters, close enough that a casual glance would read it as hers. She went to the police that afternoon. An investigator looked into the LLC formation and found the unit had never actually been occupied. The lease had been signed and the deposit paid, but no one had ever requested a key. The light had an ordinary explanation. The building manager found it after a second look, a malfunctioning LED fixture in the exhaust vent, triggered by a timer in the HVAC system, approximately 4 minutes before an automatic shut-off. What stayed with Sophie, what she wrote she couldn't stop thinking about, was not the light. It was the fact that someone had registered a company in her name, addressed to her apartment, and leased the unit across her courtyard using a copy of her identity that was just imprecise enough to avoid her noticing. The investigator told her, in their second meeting, they had seen this pattern once before. They did not say what the pattern was used for. I moved in March. 4th floor, different wing, no courtyard view. I still sleep with the blinds closed. I know it doesn't do anything. I do it anyway. Sophie's story was about someone watching her carefully from a distance without her knowledge. The narrator in tonight's 3rd story was also being watched, not by a stranger, but by her brother, who had spent 2 years managing exactly what her family was allowed to know about her. This story comes from our /AITAH. The narrator asked in her post whether she was the asshole for not confronting her brother immediately when she found out. She gave her name as Laura. The story arrived because of a forwarded email. Laura's mother turned 70 in November. The family organized a dinner, 12 people, a restaurant reservation made 3 months in advance. A group chat Laura had been added to in September. She showed up. Her brother, she calls him Daniel, looked surprised to see her. He recovered quickly and said he hadn't been sure she was coming. Laura didn't follow up in the moment. It was her mother's evening. The forwarded email arrived 2 days later. Daniel had been coordinating a gift from 3 siblings and had sent a confirmation to the florist accidentally attaching a previous email thread in the forward chain. The chain went back 8 months. In it, Daniel had been corresponding with their mother in the normal way. But within those exchanges, there were brief notes Daniel had added, notes updating their mother on why Laura was too overwhelmed with work to call that month, why Laura had asked not to be included in the summer visit, why Laura was taking some time to herself and preferred low contact at the moment. None of that was true. Laura had not asked for any of it. She had called her mother 6 times in the previous 3 months. She had no idea her mother had been told not to expect calls. She went back through the chain slowly. The pattern reached further than 8 months. References in the chain pointed to similar conversation from the previous year. Small, offhand remarks Daniel had made to their mother that, taken together, had constructed a consistent picture of a daughter who preferred a little distance. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would alarm their mother. Just a quiet, steady drift. Laura sat with the email for a long time. Then she opened her contacts and called their father's estate lawyer. She'd had the number for 2 years and had never used it. Their father had passed 2 years earlier. His estate included a modest vacation property left jointly to all 3 siblings. The paperwork had not been fully settled. Laura had been waiting on Daniel to coordinate the finalization. She had one question. Had any changes been made to the estate documents since their father's death? The lawyer reviewed the file. No changes. Laura asked whether Daniel had contacted the lawyer independently during the settlement period. The lawyer paused. He had. Standard estate inquiries, the lawyer said. Except one. In one call, Daniel had asked whether an heir who was estranged from the family, his word, could be removed from a joint inheritance. The lawyer had told him no. Laura did not confront Daniel directly. She forwarded the email chain to her mother with one line of context and called her to explain the rest. Her mother was quiet on the phone for a long time. My mother called Daniel that evening. I don't know what was said. She told me later the call lasted 4 minutes and that he didn't raise his voice. We had Christmas without him this year. My mother put his gift aside. She said she'd send it when she was ready. Laura's story is about discovering what someone kept from you. The narrator in our 4th story found something kept that had been meant for him, sitting in a box for more than 2 decades, waiting for a delivery that never happened. This story comes from our /TrueOffMyChest. The narrator gave his name as Michael. He's a high school teacher. He says his post is short because he wrote it the night he found the box, because he needed somewhere to put it. Michael's father left when he was 7. Not dramatically. There was no fight, no night disappearance. His parents separated over summer, and by September his father had relocated for work. Calls came for a while, then fewer, then silence, with no clear ending point. Michael's mother remarried when he was 12. His stepfather was steady and unremarkable, reliable at dinner, present at graduations. Michael grew up and moved out and reached a point where his father was not exactly a wound, more like a closed door. He learned not to knock. His father died in March. Heart attack at 62. They'd had one phone call in the previous 8 years. Michael drove to the city for the service, sat near the back, and drove home the same day. In June, helping his mother clear the attic before a move, he found a shoebox on the top shelf. His name was written on the lid in his father's handwriting. Inside, 12 birthday cards, 1 per year, from age 8 to age 19, each addressed, in his father's handwriting, to wherever Michael had been living that year, each with a stamp, each sealed. None had been sent. He sat on the attic floor for a while. His mother hadn't known about the box. It had been in a storage unit his father kept near his apartment, the kind rented monthly and mostly forgotten. After the death, the facility contacted the estate, who contacted Michael as next of kin. The box had been mailed to his mother's address, where Michael had been sorting mail since June. He opened the earliest card first. Age 8, a cartoon dog on the front. Inside, in his father's handwriting, asterisk happy birthday. I think about you, asterisk. He opened the next one. Age 9, asterisk happy birthday. I hope the year is good, asterisk. He sat there and opened all 12. The cards were not eloquent. His father was not a man of many words, and most inscriptions were 2 lines, 3 at most. Some years were more specific, a reference to a sport Michael had played, a school he'd attended. His father had known where he was each year. He'd written the address. He'd chosen the card. He'd sealed it. Michael doesn't know why none were sent. He has no way to ask. He sat on the attic floor with all 12 open in front of him and thought about the version of his childhood where they had arrived, one per year, and whether that version would have been better or worse or simply different. He couldn't decide. He put all 12 back in the box and carried it home. I don't know what to do with them. I keep the box in my closet. I've opened it twice since then. I don't have a point to this. I just needed to write it down. My son turned 8 last month. I sent him a card. I wrote 3 sentences. I don't know why that felt important. It did. Michael's story is about something that was never delivered. Tonight's final story is about a delivery that arrived 18 months late and went to exactly the right person. Our final story comes from r/ProRevenge. The narrator gave her name as Dana. She's a freelance graphic and UX designer, 6 years into independent work when she took on the project this story is about. She mentioned at the start of her post that she just finished reading a TrueOffMyChest story about a shoebox of unsent birthday cards, and that both stories were, in their way, about the same thing. Dana was contracted by a 2-person software startup to build their complete visual identity, brand system, UI component library, marketing site mockups, pitch deck design. The contract was clear, fixed scope, fixed price, 50% upfront, 50% on delivery. She completed the work. She sent the final invoice for $4,200. The founders thanked her and said they'd review the final assets. They went quiet. 3 weeks of follow-up. Then 6. Then a letter from the founder's lawyer claiming Dana had abandoned the project and failed to deliver final files, despite 3 separate delivery confirmation emails, each with a time-stamped link, all of which had been opened. The letter demanded Dana cease claiming ownership of any work from the engagement, citing an industry-standard work-for-hire presumption. Dana's contract, which she had written herself, said the opposite. Copyright remained with her until final payment. Final payment had not arrived. She replied once, through her own attorney, noting this. Then she let it go. She'd spent more chasing it than she'd ever collect. She filed the $4,200 as a business loss and moved on. 18 months passed. In April, a post appeared in a designer forum. A startup seeking series of funding, $2.4 million, sharing their pitch video publicly to generate interest. Dana clicked the link. The video was professionally produced. Clean narration, strong visuals, her icon set, her color palette, a specific 6-value system she had named internally, never published, never used on another project. Her navigation structure, her typography pairing, the one she'd spent 3 days testing before the founders had approved it. Every mock-up she delivered was now rendered as the company's live product. Not similar, not inspired by. Hers. She spent 2 hours cross-referencing original files against the video, frame by frame. She opened the original contract. She opened her email archive. Then she composed a message, not to the founders, to the lead investor, whose contact information was listed. In the pitch video's closing slide, the email was 3 paragraphs. The first identified her and the contract. The second noted that the visual assets in the pitch were developed under a contract retaining copyright with the designer pending payment which had not been made, and that their use in a funding pitch constituted commercial use of copyrighted material without license. The third paragraph contained one attachment, a compressed folder. Inside, the original design files with embedded metadata, timestamped 14 months before the company's founding. The 3 delivery confirmation emails with open timestamps. The contract, her attorney's letter, the founder's lawyer's reply. The investor's assistant responded within 4 hours requesting a call. Dana did not take the call. She replied in writing that she would be glad to discuss the matter once the original invoice was settled, plus 18 months interest at her standard rate, plus her attorney's fees. The check arrived in 12 days. $9,400. The founder's pitch was withdrawn from the funding round. I kept every file from every project I've ever worked on. Clients used to ask why I maintained such detailed records. I'd tell them it was just how I worked. That was the true answer. It just turned out to also be a useful one. I still have the original contract. I keep it in a folder I label closed. I'll move finished things there when they're actually finished. That one took 18 months longer than it should have. But it's closed now. That's 5 for tonight from Drama Vault. Claire, who waited for a system to find its own edge. Sophie, who documented the undocumentable until the documentation turned the other way. Laura, who found 2 years of silence in a forwarded email chain. Michael, who found 12 birthday cards in a shoebox, all of them sealed. And Dana, who kept every file. If one of tonight's stories stayed with you, subscribe and follow. Next week, 5 more stories from the corners of the internet where someone kept the record at exactly the right time. See you then.